So this study basically came out in 2021, I believe in October. And it basically just showed that vegan diets are cheaper than the benchmark diet, particularly in high-income countries. So here we have high-income countries, and what you can see is that a vegan diet that's like grain-based will cost you about $5 a day, maybe a little less. And the benchmark diet for most rich countries is about $7 a day. So it's about like a 34% drop in price. So before we even start, I just kind of want to show that because I'm going to show you very specific to my region prices, but I just want anyone who's watching this or is hearing about this for the first time to understand there are studies to sort of back up this more general rule. And what I'm going to just show you is the specific case of where I live, which corroborates what you see here. So I also want to talk about real quick, like the claim that we usually get here is that veganism is too expensive, not just that it's more expensive. And so I think there's a difference between too expensive and more expensive. And basically, like for instance, if the vegan diet cost, I don't know, maybe $2 more a month, right? That would be more expensive, but I think even most non-vegans wouldn't use that as an argument to say it's like too expensive, right? So I think there's different levels here, right? There's too expensive, more expensive, same cost, and then, cost less. And so one reason I think I bring this up a lot, I've said it in multiple videos at this point, is because it's not just, the objection isn't just wrong, it's like really wrong. It's exceptionally wrong, I would say. Because it's not just that it's not too expensive, it's not more expensive, it's not even the same, it's less. And it's about 30% less, which is like a pretty considerable amount of money. So like if you extrapolate this out to a month, $7 times 30 would be $210 a month versus $150 a month. So that's a pretty big chunk off your grocery bill, especially if you're like low income or something. $60 I think is pretty substantial. Anyway, if you guys want me to talk about the study more, I'll go back to that at the end. This is an interesting study. I think there's actually a lot of interesting stuff to pull out here, but this is about my monstrosity of an Excel sheet, not about this study. Okay. So the Excel sheet, right? So basically, I can get more into the end about like all the nitty gritty here and the equations I used and all that stuff, but just a real quick, what is this sheet, right? Basically, there's these 4 columns here, whatever you're buying, which is like the price of it, the calories, the protein, and the servings. All you do is you fill out these 4 columns, and everything else in the spreadsheet will populate automatically. So all these numbers here are derivative of these numbers. Essentially, there's a bunch of Excel equations here in all of these different cells, and they just calculate all the rest out based on whatever you input here. So here's all-purpose flour. I input these 3 things or these 4 things, and then I get out all this data, right? The calories per dollar, the dollars per month, things like that. So basically, it's basically as you'd expect, right? You're going to find exactly what we already know as vegans from shopping for groceries and all that stuff. But what this really is, it's not so much just a spreadsheet. What it is it's kind of like, it's like a skeleton for working through the NPC dialogue tree that is this objection, and then the like layers of objection underneath it as you sort of refute each step. So oftentimes what will happen is people will say, veganism is too expensive. And I'll say, actually, it's not. Some of the cheapest items are vegan items or vegan friendly, whatever. And then they'll say, well, yeah, okay, so rice and flour, those are really cheap, but you don't get enough protein. And I'll say, well, okay, here's some things that you can get enough protein, right? Here's like legumes and soy and things like that. And they'll say, okay, well, you can get enough protein and it is cheap, but it takes longer to cook these items, right? And then so I'll say, well, actually, here are some things that don't take longer to cook. And so this spreadsheet is essentially set up in such a way as to just walk you down that path and refute each of those points sort of one by one. And so the first thing here is the calories per dollar. So basically, if is a food cheaper than another food, we're basically looking at calories, right? We could look at all sorts of metrics. We could look protein if we want, or fat, or whatever. But the key that turns the rest of these metrics is the calories, right? So that's the one we're going to look at. So in Excel, you can just basically sort things by largest to smallest. So what we have at the top here is the calories per dollar. So the higher this number, the more cost efficient the food is, like the cheaper it is, basically, right? So like all-purpose flour, for instance, $1 gets you like almost 4,000 calories, which is insane, basically. That's a ton of calories for $1. And then the column to the right here shows like if you were to only eat this food, like in the hypothetical, right? You only eat all-purpose flour, right? That would cost you $15 a month. And so like if you only ate peanuts, that would cost you $69 a month, right? So that's basically just kind of two ways to look at that. So then, are vegan foods cheaper than the non-vegan alternatives? Yeah, of course. So when we sort this, we've got all-purpose flour, brown rice, pasta, all the stuff dried beans, oats, red lentils, green lentils, flaxseed, peanuts. There are a couple things here that are surprising, though. So flax seeds was one that kind of seemed like a bougie food to me that I was surprised was cheaper. But the big one here is quinoa. Quinoa is cheaper than most non-vegan alternatives. And quinoa is like held up as like this like very fancy, like bougie whatever. And you're still getting about 600 calories per dollar there, which, as you'll see in a second, like fares very well compared to, eggs and things like that. So anyway, there's a lot of other stuff here. So as we're going through this, these orange and gray, these are things that are not vegan, right? So cow's milk, for instance, comes in here at 400. So significantly cheaper than cow's milk, quinoa. Crazy, right? But cow's milk, I'll talk about in a second why I think cow's milk was kind of bullshit here, because I feel like the number is artificially inflated because of the way I did these metrics. But I'll talk about that in a sec. So I think the first legitimate non-vegan item here is eggs, right? And eggs is 300. So the first thing to kind of see here is that it's not just that there's a bunch of things that are cheaper than the animal products, but they're like a lot cheaper. So, eggs here is 300. And if you were to only eat eggs, right, it would cost you $185 a month. So just compare that to $15 a month if you were to only eat all-purpose flour. Or even if we take like some high-protein food like these pinto beans, right? Pinto beans, $44 for the whole month, and you get 1,300 calories per dollar. So $44 a month compared to $185 per month if that were, to be all that you ate. So that's like, again, that's not just like a slightly more or less expensive item, right? That's like considerably more. So 44 compared to 180 is like 4 times more expensive. Eggs are compared to pinto beans. And we haven't even got to chicken, right? So eggs are one of the cheapest things, right? They're $3.23. You go down to chicken, and now we're in like the 230s. You go down to cow flesh, and now we're into like maybe 150 to 200, right? So the point is that these are significantly less expensive, not just a little bit, So that's the first thing, right? This is the first general objection we run into. So after you show someone that, this is when they're like, oh, but okay, you can't get that much protein, though. You're talking about low protein foods. Well, sometimes, right? All-purpose flour isn't particularly high protein, although it's actually not that low in protein. But we've, of course, got all the beans, so we have plenty of high-protein foods in here. So that kind of takes me to this other thing. And this is something that I do think I have noticed some lack of knowledge here with vegans, which is like exactly how much protein you might want to get. So I kind of want to go over this real quick as far as protein requirements. So I basically separated this into like 3 different protein requirements you might want. And so one is 0.8 grams per kilogram, 1.2 grams per kilogram, and 1.6 grams per kilogram. And that's the grams of protein you would eat compared to your body weight in kilograms. And also, if you live in a shitty country like me that doesn't use the metric system, I've put the non-metric conversions down here for you if you want to see like what sort of protein you might need based on your body weight. So why these 3 numbers? Like, what are these 3 things? So the 0.8 is the RDA, which is sort of like the minimum amount of protein. This is the amount of protein that if you ate it, you wouldn't have a deficiency, right? 1.2 is like the highest I've seen someone recommend for normal people. So if you follow the YouTube channel Nutrition Made Simple, which I highly recommend, it's a great fucking YouTube channel on plant-based nutrition. He had a protein researcher on recently who studies protein metabolism. And that guy said to go up to 1.2 for like optimum health. Now that's the highest I've seen, like, that's the highest I've seen said for like a normal person, but still I put it here in the interest of trying to be like as unbiased as possible. Like I want to take sort of best case scenarios, right? Or I would say the hardest case scenario against the vegan argument. And then I have here 1.6 is what you would need as an athlete. So this is someone who's like lifting weights or something. Typically you don't see any benefit for like sort of like strength and muscle building after 1.6. Yeah. So if you're lifting weights, this is probably what you would want to be optimal, but you can also be lifting weights and not hit that. Like I don't think I lift weights like 3 days a week and I don't typically hit that much, I don't think. I'm somewhere between these two, right? And the gains I've seen in the gym are totally fine. You know, again, maybe if you're an athlete at the top of your game and it really matters, but if you're just like a weekend warrior or whatever, this is fine. So what I basically did here is I did those calculations based on a 2,000 calorie diet. Everything here is based off of a 2,000 calorie diet. If you eat more than that, that's fine too. Everything would scale. Like there's no different conclusions to draw really if you have a 2,500 calorie diet or a 3,000 calorie diet or whatever. This stuff will all scale. But basically what we find here is, so for someone who's going to eat 2,000 calories, so that's like essentially like a 132-pound female who is like moderately active. That's kind of the range that you would be eating in. So you would need anywhere between 47 and 96 grams of protein to hit these various like amounts of protein that you would want, right? So what I did is I calculated the amount of protein per 2,000 calories. So this is how much protein you would get if you ate nothing but this food for all your calories, right? And I sort of partition that here so that you can quickly toggle back and forth between them. So here, these are like lined up as like the most expensive to least expensive. But maybe you say, okay, well, I only want things that are going to give me at least 60 grams of protein per 2,000 calories. Then you click that, right? So are there still foods that meet that threshold? Yes, there's a tons of foods that meet that threshold, right? Down here is when we first hit milk. Down here is when we hit eggs. Well, okay, well, I want 80 grams per 2,000 calories. Click that off. Now we've got things that are 80 or more. Do we still have stuff that meets these two criteria that's both cheaper and gets you 80 grams of protein? Yeah, of course. There's a ton of stuff, right? And then even the most stringent, right, 100 grams of protein per 2,000 calories, and that's at least 100, right? This is a pretty stringent standard. Like 100 grams of protein per 2,000 calories is like, that's a pretty high protein food. And just to prove to you that, it is, I have this little thing from Wikipedia about what constitutes a high protein diet. So high protein diet is one in which there's 20% or more of the total daily calories come from protein. And just a quick nutrition lesson for people, 100 grams of protein would be 20% of the calories coming from protein. So if you don't know, 1 gram of protein is 4 calories, 1 gram of carbs is 4 calories, and 1 gram of fat is 9 calories. Cool. So 100 grams of protein times 400 calories, 400 divided by 2,000 is 20%. Wait, no, did I do that right? I think I did that wrong. Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, 400 divided by 2,000 is 20%. So yeah, that's the most math there will be in here, I promise. But anyway, so just some things to note. But yeah, even if we do the most stringent, right, we still have a ton of things that meet all these criteria, right? So you've got all the dried beans, you've got split peas, you've got lentils, you've got, there's actually this place called Sincerely Nuts that does edamame that's roasted. So it's basically like kind of like finger food, like a chip or something, like you just, pop them in, or you can throw them on a salad or something like that. And so those actually end up being like pretty cost efficient. Mung beans, we've got all the beans that are in cans also. And we've even got this, so this is a good product, this gluten-free pasta by Berea. It actually delivers quite a lot of protein and is very cost efficient. So 500 calories per dollar, and it's giving you 116 grams of protein per 2,000 calories. So that's really good, especially for something that you generally like consider more of like a carb source, right? Because when I'm eating pasta, I'm not thinking like, oh, this is like my protein for the day. So that's a good product. What else? We got pumpkin seeds. Pumpkin seeds are another good one. They're just like finger food that you can eat anytime. Hemp hearts, pea protein, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, tons of stuff here, right? So, and then one thing, in one of my videos, I think it was the one where I was talking about goalpost shifting and things like that. And I sort of like offhandedly as an example, gave the example that you could like, that cooking tofu and cooking chicken are like fairly similar. They're like similar prices, or tofu's cheaper or whatever. And I had this, I had someone comment, and they were like very incensed by the fact that I would say that. They said, you're lying to people here. This is just like totally misleading or whatever. So I put in a ton of different tofus to see, was I lying? Is this misleading? And the answer is a little complicated, actually. So comparing tofu to chicken, it depends on the type of tofu you're getting. So, and again, all these prices are from like my local grocery stores or Amazon. So a bunch of tofu is cheaper. So this tofu, like extra firm tofu from the store called Sprouts, firm tofu, Nasoya organic tofu. I like this. This is a good brand. These are all cheaper, right? So these are all more cost efficient. They're like the 260 to like 300 range, whereas chicken is 237 to 230. But there is some tofu that's right around that range, which you see here, and then there's some tofu that is more expensive than chicken. So it kind of depends on, I would say that it's right around the same price depending on what you get. So if you guys don't know, I mean, we're vegan, so you probably know, but it took me a while to discover this. There's a level above extra firm tofu, and it's super firm tofu. And I think it's like hands down the best tofu. Like it just crushes all the other ones. And it also crushes them on price efficiency because there's more calories and protein packed into like this small area. So that I'm like never going back. Super firm tofu is basically all I eat. I don't understand silken tofu. I think it's trash. If there's anyone here who cooks with silken tofu, please tell me what to do with it because I think it's disgusting. So help me out. So what did we cover, right? We covered the bullshit about, is it more expensive? Can you get enough protein? Oh, then the other thing I get then is then people start saying, well, yeah, but it takes so much longer to cook these foods, right? Like if you have dried beans, you gotta, boil them forever, soak them overnight, all this shit. Okay. With the dried beans, that is true, although I will say there is one caveat here. There's a difference between active cook time and passive cook time. And so like, if my cook time is like, I had to take 40 minutes to cut up a ton of vegetables and like throw them in a stew or something, that 40 minutes is much different than if I throw lentils in a pot and boil them for 40 minutes, right? Because in that passive cook time, I can then go and do other shit. I don't have to just be like looking at that pot as it boils, right? So I think that's like one kind of thing to say here, but it is true, right? This is gonna take longer. This is gonna take longer to cook. So what I did is I categorized every food by, in comparison to chicken. So the cook time compared to chicken. So is it more, is it the same, is it less, or am I unsure? So I'm going to take out more here. And so now we have the most stringent criteria, right? So this is less expensive per calorie, gives you 100 grams of protein per 2,000 calories, and takes less or the same amount of time as chicken. So are there options? Yeah, there's still options. So the edamame I talked about earlier, the beans, the canned beans specifically, right? Gluten-free pasta, this protein plus, pumpkin seeds, hemp hearts, more beans. Even this protein, there's a protein on Amazon that actually amazingly is both cheaper calorically and gives you high protein. So that's good. Hemp hearts again, Vital Wheat gluten. This is the only one I wasn't sure of. So I've never cooked with Vital Wheat gluten. My understanding is, or what I thought I saw once was that you just like put it in, like mix it with some water or something and then throw it in a pan. So if someone can tell me how long that takes, that would be helpful. So what else? Yeah, so again, there's plenty of options here. And I mean, if you go down all the way to chicken, again, we've got the tofu that is, I would say similar or even less time in most cases. So beans, of course, you could just put beans in in a bowl and heat them up in the microwave. Obviously, pumpkin seeds you can eat right out of the bag. You can throw them in a smoothie. You can throw them on oatmeal. You can throw them on a salad. Same with hemp hearts, this roasted edamame, all that stuff. So there's tons of stuff that doesn't take any longer. That's even less time than cooking chicken. So yeah, I don't buy this thing that there's specific vegan foods that there aren't any vegan foods that don't take longer. So what are the? Hold on, I gotta consult my notes here because I have some others. Oh, okay. Then the other one I've heard is like, okay, that's cool, but it's unfair that like low-income individuals have to only eat, beans and tofu and things like that. And, wealthier individuals can eat like Beyond Meat and things like that, which like, I mean, okay, fair. Is that unfair? Yeah. I mean, the income gap sucks. I don't think most people are going to argue that, obviously we all wish that there were less low-income people, more people could have exactly what they want in life. But I don't think that's even true in this case. And it's because some of these things give you so much savings that if you combine, if you take, let's say you take, I don't know, $40 and you spend $20 on dried beans and $20 on Beyond Beef, the beans are so cheap that even if the Beyond Beef is expensive, whenever you average them out, this will be the same price as chicken on a per calorie basis. So I kind of did this is just a real brief calculation here. But if I were to take pinto beans and do a $50 split on pinto beans and Beyond Meat, I would get a calorie per dollar of 744. And remember, eggs were like 300 something and chicken's like 200. Cow flesh is like 150 to 200, right? So all those are still lower. So you could still, with dried beans and Beyond Meat, you could still get to a more cost efficient grocery bill than if you were just filling that whole void with, chicken or something like that. And even with canned beans here, you even still kind of squeak ahead of it. So, and even if that weren't your desired split, like you could do an 80-20 split or whatever. So there are still ways that you could still come in pretty cheap and still get some of these more like bougie vegan products. So what else here? Oh, so then this is the final objection. And this one I think is actually somewhat valid, right? So the final objection I hear is that it takes longer to learn recipes, right? And so a lot of times what you have are people who are like time impoverished, right? So they don't have time to learn new recipes. They don't have time to, look into like nutrition and things like that. And this is definitely true. The lower income you are, the less time you're going to have. But I would say a couple of things to this. First off, I think there's a bunch of things that just slot in very easily. Like, again, I don't think it's that hard to make like oatmeal in the morning. You know what I mean? Or like if you're already someone who's like making like a chicken burrito, you can make a bean burrito. So I think there are a lot of things that just slot in there really easily that don't take any more time and that are fairly easy substitutions. But it is true, right? Like if you compare someone who makes $100,000 a year to someone who makes $10,000 a year, that person who makes $100,000 is probably going to be able to go vegan more easily than someone who makes 10,000, right? Just like Jeff Bezos compared to me, right? Jeff Bezos would have a significantly easier time going vegan than I would. And that's true. But just because it's easier for Jeff Bezos to go vegan doesn't mean that I haven't already breached the threshold where it's, practicable and possible for me to go vegan. So that's kind of the first thing, is that just because there's a sliding scale of difficulty doesn't mean that, anyone on that scale hasn't already breached that threshold. So that's the kind of first thing. But the thing I would say here is, I think the way these things go is like, the person keeps bringing up point after point and kind of shifting the goalpost little by little, right? And by the time you get to this goalpost, you may be in a state where when they say, yeah, well, it's more difficult for people who are low income to do this, right? You may be in such a state that you say that you want to just deny that outright, right? Because you don't want to give them any sort of points. And I think it's a bad move. Because unless you genuinely disagree with that. But if you agree with that, I think you need to say you agree with it. Anytime you can find agreement in a discussion is always good. It always makes both people feel more comfortable. It makes them feel like you're more rational, like you have something in common. And then also you're not like lying, you know what I mean? Like if you actually don't think that's true. But what I've said before is that I think you do need to go back and be like, okay, that is true. I totally am on board with that. But do we agree, right? We agree that it is cheaper, that you can that the cook time isn't longer, that X, Y, Z, right? We can agree on these things. Because if you let them have that last point and then don't do that, I think they can walk away thinking that they've refuted everything, right? And so I think that's something you don't want to do. Sometimes it's good to kind of summarize what you just talked about in the discussion, because it's very easy to go down these rabbit holes and then like not really remember the general vibe of what took place, right? You just remember at the end, they got you, and it can feel to you like losing, and it can feel to them like they've refuted all your points. So I think always doing like a little summary, if you can, is sort of a good idea. All right. What else did I want to bring up here? Oh, so I think there's also, even in my spreadsheet, I do think it actually even kind of favors non-vegan food in a way. I think there's something kind of like bullshitty here about me doing the calories per dollar and the protein per dollar. So protein per dollar is obviously going to favor non-vegan products, right? This is the thing that animal body parts have the most of, right? But we could have done this different ways. I could have done vitamin C per dollar, or I could have done fiber per dollar. You know what I mean? And then they would have gotten absolutely crushed, right? So there is a framing effect here by framing it with protein that inherently makes them look better, and they still basically got crushed. So like, this is just the point I just want to keep hammering home, is that even in the best case scenarios, like all sorts of ways that we like shift this around, like the non-vegan options are still getting like just totally crushed. So I know, I think that's why like this particular point like annoys me so much when people bring it up, because I think there's just so much evidence that is just like patently untrue, as far as what's possible. Now, again, it may be the case that vegans could potentially spend more on their groceries in reality. Like maybe most vegans are more into food than most people, and so they spend a larger portion of their budget, you know, and so they'll buy those specialty items just because they want them. But the point is when people say this is too expensive or more expensive or whatever, they're implying that it's not possible to go vegan, and that's what we're kind of refuting here. So yeah, do I have anything else? Okay, so I'll take questions in a second here. I haven't been following the chat, I'm sorry, but I'm glad that you've been talking amongst yourselves. Someone did say, will this be shareable? Yeah, so I'm going to post this on my Patreon after this. If you're not on my Patreon, that's fine. Also, just shoot me a message on Instagram and give me your email, and I'll email it to you. I don't know how else to share it beyond that, beyond just like directly sending it to you. I unfortunately don't have like a web page yet or anything, but I probably should make one. So I want to go through some caveats because some things that people might raise here. So one thing is, this was just for my region. So I basically took like a kind of, it's not the bottom barrel grocery store that I looked at. It's called Food Lion. It's kind of like mid-tier, whatever, just like plain old grocery store. And so for all the, you know, the animal body parts and secretions, for all those things, I basically took the Food Lion brand, which is essentially the cheapest brand there. And then I mostly compared that to the Food Lion brand wherever I could. But in a lot of these cases, it's not even the Food Lion brand. It's like more bougie brands. It's like brands on Amazon and things like that. And so even when you do those comparisons, you still get less. So that's like one thing people would say. Another thing you hear people say is like, oh, well, actually, you know, I can find hot dogs where I live, and they're, you know, they're like $1 a pound or whatever. You know, people say I found this sale once. Okay, well, I've also found sales. So none of the things in the spreadsheet are sales. I found things on sale too. I found like I think it was like dried beans or dried lentils for some like insanely low price, like 30 cents for like a 1 pound bag or something. And so once we start comparing like sale price to sale price, it just like everything goes out the window because we never know what sale there's going to be. So this is just all standard prices, no sale prices, anything like that. What else? I think that's mostly what I had here. So yeah, and I did a price comparison about a year ago, and the same thing basically held, right? Like, and it was the same shit. Beans are cheap, soy is cheap, you know, different nuts and seeds are very cheap, and it tends to be that, you know, animals are more expensive. I did go, and I was at a grocery store where I saw that the cow flesh was cheaper there, which would, you know, boost it up a little. But at that same grocery store, the chicken was like 2 or 3 times as expensive as what's in this spreadsheet. So like, there's always like, oh, well, this costs X where I live, but even with where you live, from grocery store to grocery store, things change. But the point is, the average, overwhelmingly, over and over, with like multiple, you know, testing this multiple times, testing with multiple products, just vegan stuff is just cheaper. Like, I don't know, yeah, I don't, that's that's as many ways as I can possibly say it. I want this to be like the end all be all. Like, I don't want to talk about veganism being cheaper ever again after all this.